Phil accused me of cheating and disowned our baby because of his brown eyes. Now, he's turning our older son against us and not letting them meet, so I cut him off for my children's sake. I, a 37-year-old woman, have been facing a bizarre problem. Recently I had a baby, and my father-in-law Phil refuses to accept him as his grandchild because of his brown eyes. I have been married to my husband for over a decade, and we have a 4-year-old son, Dean, who looks exactly like his father and grandfather. However, our younger son, who is now 4 weeks old, looks like me but has brown eyes like my dad. My husband, Phil, Dean, and I all have blue eyes. Phil said he would not accept my younger son as his grandchild until we did a paternity test on him. This is just one example of how crazy Phil is. He has never been fond of me since he met me 15 years ago. He has been resentful of me from the beginning. We were still in grad school when my husband introduced me to his parents. Initially, Phil was cheerful and fascinated by my achievements at school, but when he learned about my parents, he made an awful face. He was upset that I came from a lower middle-class family and thought I was not a suitable girl for his son. He even suggested my husband consider his friend's daughter, who was classier and wealthier. My husband didn't tell me all this until much later. Despite Phil's disapproval, my husband stuck around. Contrary to what Phil thinks, we are not poor. My dad is a plumber, not a flashy businessman like Phil. Phil raised an eyebrow when I told him my mom worked part-time jobs. Money was decent, but with 4 kids, we were always on a tight budget. Thanks to a scholarship, I was able to attend college. Phil was shocked when my husband told him we were getting married because he couldn't believe our relationship sustained after grad school. Though upset, he showed up at our wedding and was on his best behavior, even with my parents and family. 6 years later, when our elder son was born, Phil was over the moon. He had doubted my ability to conceive a grandchild because we didn't plan kids for the first 6 years of our marriage. He was happy to have a grandchild who looked like him and his son. Phil believes boys are important as they bear the family name. My husband and I thought it was a good way to bond with Phil. We could have cut him off, but we put up with him because of my mother-in-law Mill, who has always been sweet and loving to me. Dean visited his grandparents every weekend. Sometimes my husband took him, and sometimes I did. After he turned 1, he started staying over at his grandparents' house for the weekend. This gave us a chance to rekindle our relationship. Pregnancy and nursing a child can push romance into the background. We were working parents, so we didn't have time during the week. We enjoyed our weekends alone when Dean spent time with his grandparents. Things got better between me and Phil as we met often for weekly dinners at their place. When Phil learned about my second pregnancy, he started telling my son that a mini Dean would be coming soon. I knew it was a boy, but my husband wanted it to be a surprise, so I didn't tell anyone. I hated when Phil said only boys are born in his family because my second son was going to boost his ego. When my younger son, Sean, was born, Phil entered my room with Dean in his arms, saying, "Let's see our junior Dean. I'm sure he will look just like his dad, grandpa, and brother." When I handed him the baby and he saw him, he freaked out. He asked why Sean had brown eyes and suggested the hospital gave us the wrong baby. I explained that brown eyes are common and my father and siblings have brown eyes. He couldn't accept that Sean didn't have any of his family's features. He accused me of cheating on my husband. I screamed, "Genetics. He looks like me. Can't you see?" Phil got mad and whispered to Mill that they were leaving. He didn't let her touch the baby and left with her. My husband wasn't around at that time. When he came back and saw my folks leaving, he asked what happened. I told him to ask his parents. He called his mother, who narrated the entire incident to him. My husband's reaction was satisfying. He flipped out and said, "He is my son, and we're not doing any paternity test." His support meant everything to me at that point. Dean was staying with his grandparents during my delivery. When my husband went to pick him up, Phil asked when the DNA report would come. My husband told him we were not doing any tests and that he knew he was the father of our son. Phil must have questioned my character, but my husband brought Dean home. Dean was happy to meet his younger brother but mentioned his grandpa said the baby would look like him. I explained that his baby brother looks like my dad. There hasn't been any discussion since then, but Phil hasn't allowed Mill to visit the baby until we do a paternity test. It hurts to see Mill suffer. She video calls me to see the baby and sobs that she cannot hold him. I know it's our baby because I have never cheated on my husband. There's no harm in getting the DNA test done to close the matter, but it would boost Phil's ego, which I don't want to do. Any suggestions are highly appreciated. Update 1. Hello all, thanks for the comments. My baby is now 6 months old and has started looking like me, which my husband and I absolutely adore. However, there's a problem with the elder one. I'll come to that eventually. The situation with Phil is still the same. He refuses to accept Sean as his grandchild without seeing a DNA report. Mill is also not allowed to meet the baby. However, she visits us secretly during the afternoon when Phil and my husband are at work. No one knows about these secret meetings. I share a very good relationship with my Mill. She is the reason we are still in touch with Phil. She loves both her grandsons dearly, and we don't want to take that away from her. Meanwhile, Dean continues visiting his grandparents. He spends his weekends fishing and golfing with his grandpa. It was a relief for us because it gave us enough time to care for the younger one. However, Phil is using this opportunity to turn my son against me. 2 weeks ago, Dean told me I should send Sean back to his parents. I was confused. I said we are Sean's parents and this is his house. He said his grandpa told him Sean was not his brother and someone else's child, so unless I gave him away, he was not going to come to our house. I was flabbergasted. How can someone be so evil as to fill poison into a 4-year-old's mind? Dean has been behaving very rudely. He has grown resentful of his brother. He throws tantrums. We ignored it, thinking it was just a meltdown, but now we realize he is turning into an entitled brat. We discussed this with a psychologist who said sibling jealousy was common. She suggested we give him time and space to accept the baby and develop a sibling bond. She gave us tips and activities to build their connection and asked us to wait at least a year. Dean didn't harbor this hatred on his own. It is being fed by his grandpa. I went soft on Dean, explaining that grandpa might be kidding and emphasized that Sean was his baby brother. When my husband came home, I told him about it. He got angry and wanted to call his dad. I sat him down, explaining the deeper problem. I told him we should do the DNA test to close the chapter because it is creating chaos in the family. He refused, saying he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Phil has been feeding lies to Dean, turning him bitter. My husband's stubbornness is inherited from his father. He refused to do the DNA test, calling his dad to yell at him. I got pissed off because this is a delicate situation. We cannot just stop Dean from going to his grandpa's. He is almost 5 and questions everything. We need to be smart about it. I don't know how to handle this situation. Update 2. Hey guys, thanks for your support. Here's the latest update. After the last blowout, things were quiet. Mill continued to visit us secretly, but now she comes when Dean is at play school. He is super close to his grandpa, and we didn't want him to leak the secret. I told Mill to stand up for her choice, but she chose this way. Dean visits his grandparents as usual. Though he hasn't said or done anything evil to his brother lately, I dislike his closeness with Phil. Phil is turning my son into a mini version of himself, which I don't want. The attachment is becoming toxic. Last weekend, my parents came over. They live 9 hours away. I told Dean he wouldn't visit his grandparents because we were going out with my parents. He threw tantrums. I tried to make him understand, but he started crying and throwing things. My parents insisted we drop Dean to his grandpa if he didn't want to spend time with them. I got mad and told my husband we had to cut off his dad because I didn't want my son to become a chauvinist like his grandpa. My husband got mad at me, but later understood I was trying to protect our son. Dean turned 5 on Wednesday. His grandpa gifted him a PS5 and an iPhone 12. I was shocked. I told my husband Dean is too young for such expensive things. His dad refused to let us take them away. It was time for me to play the final card. I warned my husband I would stop Mill from visiting our house if he didn't agree to the DNA test. I know it was wrong, but this was the only way to make him understand. He agreed. Finally. We collected samples yesterday and submitted them to the lab. It will take 3 days to get the results. I'm so glad my husband has finally agreed. It's just a formality, we know the truth. But it's the only way to shut Phil's mouth and protect our son. Final update. Hello all, the results are here. I am so excited and relieved. Sean is 99.9% my husband's son. I knew the results would be this way. I took a printout and framed it for Phil. I thought we could throw a surprise party for him. However, things took an unexpected turn. When I showed the report to my husband, he cried. He was so emotional. We knew the result, but the report made him more emotional than expected. He hugged me and kissed Sean. He called his dad and said he was coming over. He wanted to confront him. I stopped him because it would affect Dean and Mill. I suggested we go there with the kids and talk calmly. We all went there. Dean was playing in the backyard. Mill was in the kitchen. When we entered, Phil gave us a dirty look. He ignored Sean. My husband handed him the report and said, "You don't believe me, but science doesn't lie." He is my son, he didn't take the report. He said, I don't trust the results. Anyone can manipulate them. We were shocked. How can he be so heartless? We turned to leave when Mill came in. She said, enough. Phil, I'm going to stay with my son. I'll come back only when you accept Sean as your grandson. She picked her bag and left with us. I am glad she chose to stand up for her love for her grandsons. Phil didn't call or visit us for 2 days. We asked Dean if he wanted to meet Grandpa. He said he would meet him at his birthday party. Mill moved in with us. Dean's birthday party was yesterday. Phil came, held Sean for the first time, and apologized. He looked emotional. I didn't know whether to feel good or bad. I asked him if he would continue being a toxic grandpa. He promised he would try to be a better person. I hope he keeps his promise. As for Dean, we are taking him to therapy. He needs it. My husband and I have also decided to seek counseling to learn better parenting skills and manage conflicts better. We are focusing on building a strong family bond. I hope the worst is over, and we can now look forward to a happy family life. Thanks for all your support and suggestions. It has been a roller coaster ride, but your advice helped me sail through. We are stronger and happier than ever.